Tomasulo, and thank you for inviting me to make a bit of a presentation. I'm the academic director and core faculty member at the Spirituality Mind Body program at Teachers College, Columbia University. And I'm here today to talk a little bit about learned hopefulness and character strengths. I've put together a couple of slides to help us deal with the new research and information that's coming out. But I really want to start with a quote from A Course in Miracles. What you perceive in others, you are strengthening in yourself. And the reason I want to begin here is that when we learn to regulate our perception about the world we're in, and we get to see it through a different lens, it not only changes how we view outside of us, but it changes what happens inside. Over time, we're going to be able to enhance our own well-being by being able to see the strengths of others. So I want to start with this quote, and let's see where the research takes us and some of the new things that have been happening. This is probably something that you're very familiar with by now if you're in the field of positive psychology. It is a psychological construct put together by Dr. Martin Seligman, who is considered to be the father of positive psychology. And this psychological construct has 5 elements: positive emotions, engagement, positive relationships, meaning, and accomplishment. It's like the weather. When we go to describe well-being, when we try to explain the weather to somebody, if we only said it's 62 degrees, it wouldn't be sufficient. They wouldn't know if it's raining. They wouldn't know if it's dark outside. They wouldn't know if it's daytime, nighttime, if there's wind. So it's the same thing with well-being. We need lots of different ways to enhance our understanding of what well-being means. And these 5 elements are really the cornerstone of appreciating how well-being works. And what I'm going to do today is I'm going to make a suggestion that there's a little something here that we can add to, and that's hope. It's perma, if you will. I want to add hope to this equation because, quite honestly, I think hope is the pivot point for understanding how all of these elements can come together and what actually makes all of them dynamic. So with hope, I did a good chunk of research to put together this book, Learned Hopefulness, and much of what you're going to hear today comes from that work. In the beginning, when I was trying to understand hope theories and elements behind hope, this yielded a very scattered approach. It was like the 3 blind men and the elephant. If you look at how the different researchers were categorizing how hope works, they were grabbing a different part of it. Whoever grabbed the tail said it looks like a rope. Whoever grabbed the leg said it looks like a tree. And whoever grabbed the tusk says it looks like a spear. And in the beginning, I was thinking maybe the way to approach understanding hope is to just find the best theory. But stepping back from it, I think the better way is to say, what if they're all right? What if all the research was right? What would hope look like then? This starts to yield a way of understanding positive interventions that can be extremely helpful to mental health. And what I'm advocating for here today, by the way, is something known as eunoia, normal mental health, which includes a balance of positive and negative emotions. Positive psychology gets pretty much a bad rap because it looks like we're trying to ignore negativity, and we have this second wave, third wave, fourth wave understanding about we want to include negative or well, the truth of the matter is it was never about ignoring negative emotions of any kind or negative perception. We need that. But what we do need is a much better balance. So when I teach about positive emotions, one of the ways that I look at it is that the interventions can be categorized based on where they focus. So there are interventions that help us reframe the past, interventions that help us engage more deeply into the present. And then, of course, there are those interventions that help us lean into the future a little bit. And those are the ones I'm particularly interested in, but they stand on the shoulders of the others. So when we study hope, and we try to include an understanding of how hope is a character strength or how hope is used in transformation, we're really taking a look at the history of how positive emotions may be activated, or in the case of forgiveness, how negative elements may be blocking positive emotions. We're taking a look at a whole range of positivity when we study hope. Now, one of the ways to appreciate this is that almost always, if it's a class I'm teaching at Columbia or doing a workshop or presentation, I'll begin with interventions on gratitude, doing a review of the day before, or a gratitude visit or a virtual gratitude visit, which I'll talk a little bit about downstream. This takes positive emotions that are in the past and helps us harvest them, bring them forward. And what the research will show is that if you take care of some of these past emotions, what will happen is that they lend themselves to you being more present, more engaged right in the moment. And then eventually, what that does is that leads us to start thinking a little bit more about the future. We have a proactive coping way of seeing the world. So this is just a general framework for understanding where positive interventions fit, because positive interventions are indeed the backbone of Parama, where we're moving ourselves into a place where we can do something deliberate, a very explicit way of trying to reduce negativity and increase positivity. At the end of the day, the reason why I'm fascinated with hope and think it has such power, and why I think learned hopefulness becomes a factor in education, in medicine, in business, is because if you can teach people how to hope more, we start to see that they have more of a sense of self-control. And once somebody has that sense of agency and self-control, it leads them to take slightly more risk and then see that they can handle that. And then that gives them a feedback loop to say there's positivity that can be had by focusing our awareness and our attention and our engagement. And so we start to see accomplishment. And of course, all along the way with that, a sense of purpose, meaning, and relationship. So all of these things get pulled into our way of being once we start believing that we can have some control over our future. Now, this is the working definition of learned hopefulness, and it is that hope is the regulation of perception toward belief in control of the future. There isn't an absolute. There's a belief that you can influence the future. And it's that belief that is so precious. So the interventions are designed to help facilitate a belief that you can have a little more control over your life, over what's going to happen to you. It's when we do not believe that that's possible that there's greater difficulty. And the American writer Henry David Thoreau kind of said it very succinctly: things don't change, we change. We don't change what's happening out there, we change our perception of what's happening. At the end of the day, we're trying to have a scale tipped in favor of more positive outcomes and fewer negative outcomes. And there's really two ways to do that. You can take the negativity off the negative side. So when we talk about things like rumination, anything that can help prevent rumination is going to help lift the negatives off of the negative side. And anything we can add to the positive is going to keep tipping that scale in that direction. I've likened this to pebbles and feathers, that negative thoughts are like pebbles and positive thoughts are like feathers. But we're not going to have one great big feather outweigh the pebbles. We're going to need lots of little feathers. It's really this moderate level of positivity that we're looking to engage in on a regular basis so that we're constantly adding to the feathers while we're taking some of the rumination off, some of the negative things off. It's only then that we're going to be able to see a tip in this scale. In putting together the research for the book, it was very clear that there were people with high hope and people with low hope. And so the people with high hope were really able to look for possibilities, notice the good, cultivate positivity, use strengths, adjust goals, engage with purpose, and cherish others. Now, that might sound like a lot, but really, when you appreciate the fact that there's this incipient moment when we're confronted with a negative or uncertain situation, that we have to decide how are we going to respond. And once we decide that we're really going to see it as something we don't have control over, if we believe we don't have control over it, if we believe there's nothing that we can do, we're going to look at this in a way of being there's no possibilities, right? We're going to be focused on the negative. That's what rumination does. We get into habits of negativity. We're going to focus on the weaknesses. So all of those things come from this moment where we have to decide, what do we believe about what's just happened? And this goes all the way back, right? This goes all the way back. Epictetus had this sense of it's not what happens; it's how we perceive what happens, and that remains central to this idea of positive psychology, and in particular, to our sense of hope. I want to focus only today on the strengths part because in the very brief time that I have, I really want to highlight this because the strengths are, I think, some of the greatest new pieces of science that we've come to when we now encounter what's strong in people. We're able to see true transformation happen. Whereas psychology as a science has focused mostly on what's wrong, we're trying to move to what's strong. So we're trying to not just diagnose people and get them from not being well to being, somehow just back to being normal. We want to try to push past that. We want to try to help people flourish and thrive. And in order to do that, we really need to focus in on what these high hope people are doing. It seems that they're focused on their strengths, that somehow they have transcended the idea that they're not going to just focus on what they can't do. They're going to focus on what's possible. What are the gifts that they've been given? What are the strengths that they have? And if this were a live presentation, meaning that if we were interacting together, I would do this experience with you. But since you're listening to this, and taking this information in, I want you to appreciate how strong the strengths can be in terms of managing our well-being, right? So if you would, I'd like you to just think about a peak experience in your life for a moment, something that was really extraordinary. So this is, like I said, a presentation where we don't have interaction, but I've set it up so that you can see how it works. So think about a peak experience that you've had that was really the reason for living, right? It was like everything seemed to come together. And again, I would imagine that most people here would know about the character strength survey. But if you don't, please just take a quick peek at these. These are the 24 character strengths, come from the viacharacter.org. We have over 15 million people who have taken this. So about every 10 seconds, somebody takes this survey. So the database is enormous. And I'd like you to think about 3 character strengths that you were using during that peak experience. Now, if you think about that, you hold that image of that peak experience. If it was giving birth or a presentation, you got a standing ovation at, or that time you backpacked through Europe, or whatever it was. If you ask yourself what character strengths were present and pick three, right? Just jot them down someplace, piece of paper, put them on your phone, on a tablet, so that you don't forget them. Now, if I were going to do mine, I'd say creativity, humor, and zest were probably the things that were being used most during that peak experience. Now imagine that I'm an evil wizard and had the capacity to stop you from using those three strengths. You could use all 21 others, but not those three. What would happen? Now, if you think about that for a moment, and I asked you to write down how you would feel if you couldn't use those three strengths for a year. Well, I have done that, and I've done that thousands of times now. And this is the kind of words that come up. Just take a quick peek at this slide. Inadequate, empty, overwhelmed, isolated, zombie, alone, lonely, sad, incomplete, down, dull, hopeless, despair, empty. It continues. Empty, depressing, flat, frustrated, lonely, apathy, selfish, afraid, empty, different person, useless, fearful, loss of identity, disorganized, hopeless, bland, concerned, boring. What happens when we look at all these words? Melancholic, right? Dull, boring, depressed, not myself, less confident, depressing, hopeless, dismal. Do you notice a theme? This is the essence of mental health and education right here. Because what you've just revealed to yourself in this experience is the kind of work that I've been doing and others have been doing on trying to shift our mental health, shift our education system. Because if you have a strength that's blocked or taken away or inhibited, if you can't be exactly who you are, and that's what the VIA character measures. It measures your signature strengths, your top 5 or 6 that are really essentially you. And if you can't be you, something goes wrong. And we didn't even look at just your top ones. We looked at the ones that just happened during the peak experience, and look at the words that we were able to generate. Now, this is a shift. This is a genuine shift toward creating programs for eunoia, for normal mental health, because we have to include an environment. We have to include therapies. We have to include education. We have to include positive medicine. We have to include ways to get people to be using their strengths, because then they will flourish. And what you may not know is that there was some other work done by Chris Peterson that only was revealed after he passed, about the fact that we can overuse or underuse our character strengths. So that makes our strengths like a violin string. So it's not just being able to use them or not, it's being able to use them in the right dosage. And that makes this perhaps a new model of mental health, of recovery, of education, of optimal well-being and performance. It may also be a new way for us to think about business. When we try to get people to come into our business, we want people that have very high levels of hope, because they're going to figure out how to get things done. They're going to turn obstacles into opportunities. This chart is really an essential way of looking at our strengths. And it's new. It's only in the last couple of years that research has started to show that all of this is true. So if I can, I'm going to end with a couple of quotes here. Latzau really said it perfectly when he said, live in your strength, because there's no better way for us to flourish and function than to do that. And, you know, if we're looking at this bi-directional element, when I start spotting strengths in you, I'm filling myself up, right? And I'm not going to see things as they are, as the Talmud would say. I'm going to see them as I am. So we're trying to open our heart a little bit more when we can see the strengths in others. And I'm going to end where I began. What you perceive in others, you are strengthening in yourself. So this isn't just for the benefit of others. It's not for just your benefit. It's for the benefit of both. Thanks so much. My name is Dr. Dan Tomasulo, and you can contact me at tomasulo@tc.columbia.edu. Thanks so much for your kind and really generous attention.